Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look in this training module at how to set up and work with our onboard data logging with our Link G5 and G4X systems. Now, the last training module, we explored working with our laptop logging, which is really the more practical logging option for most general tuning and troubleshooting that you're going to be doing with your Link. If we're in a situation where we can't have a laptop in the vehicle, you might be on track, let's say you're going down the drag strip, autocross course, road race course, rally, and you can't have a laptop. You definitely want to capture data so you can see what's going on. You don't want to be racing blind with no information. The onboard logging is going to allow you to store certain channels onto your Link, and then you can retrieve the log file back when you come into the pits. So you can look at the data and evaluate how the car is performing and make changes if needed. So the onboard logging is a vital part of motorsports that you absolutely want to get familiar with for tuning and for troubleshooting and just seeing how in general how everything is running. Now, there also may be some other situations while you're going in and tuning that you may need to reference and work with the onboard logger. That's going to be when you want to go in and log certain channels at very high rates of speed. The laptop logging is going to be pegged at 40 hertz per second on any channel that's logged. So that's going to be 40 samples per second. With the onboard logging, we can log up to 1,000 hertz or 1,000 samples per second. So we can have a substantial amount more resolution in the data because we're capturing so much more of it in the same amount of time. So things like knock control, for example, while you're tuning, you may need to use the onboard logging to capture all of the information looking at knock and how it's performing in knock control. So that's going to be another situation that you might want to consider using your onboard logging. Let's say you're on the dyno, you can actually laptop log and onboard log at the same time, which is nice. And I do that quite frequently in that specific situation I was just mentioning for knock control. If I'm seeing some oddities with the knock control, the 40 hertz sampling speed sometimes won't capture all of the knock activity in a very short period of time. The onboard logger at 1,000 hertz will absolutely capture what's going on. So just keep that in mind and kind of looking at the onboard logging as something that you're likely not going to be using on a kind of a permanent basis. The laptop logging will be something more kind of fixed in your staple for tuning, but the onboard logging is something that has a specific purpose and you probably will need to use it. All right, let's jump in here and take a look at how to set up our onboard logging. So right now I am in the online state. I am connected to my Link G5 box, and we're going to find that we can go right in here and initiate a data log if we'd like. Now we know we go up to logging here and hit record if we want a laptop log. The onboard logging is different. We're going to turn on and off the data logging function based on conditions that we can set, because we don't want to have a record and a stop button here to worry about for the onboard. If you're on track racing, you don't want to be worried about when the logging is going to stop and start. You want it to do its thing and record and not think about it. So that means we have to go to here to our setup logging and take a look at doing the actual setup. Now we have two tabs in our logging setup. We have our PC logging. We've set that up in the previous training module. We know the max rate that we can sample at is 40 hertz, and we can add the channels that we want to log for the laptop logging. We can do a similar task with the ECU logging here, and when we go up here, we see there's an enabled button. We want to turn that on if we plan on using the onboard logging. The default frequency, this is something to consider. The number of samples per second, that's our frequency here, is what we can choose for all the logging channels. So when we select a channel here from the available runtime value parameters and we put them into our logging parameters list, it'll default at 50 hertz. Now we can go in and actually change that and update it to what we want to log at, but this default option is going to be what it defaults at. I would leave it at 50 hertz for right now because that is a pretty decent sampling speed for most channels. Again, high speed channels such as knock control, shock sensors need to be logged at very high rates of speed. Again, we have the option here to go up to 1,000 hertz. Now, the higher logging speed, higher number of samples per second is great, but it does come at a cost. There is going to be a finite amount of onboard logging memory space. The more samples per second or the higher frequency rate that we sample at, the larger the file size will be. So you'll start to use up the space that you have available quicker. So for example, if I'm on track for an hour or two and I want to capture all of the data, I may not be able to log all the channels at 1,000 or 500 hertz. I might have to reduce the channels down to something like 100 to 200 hertz to be able to make sure that I am not going to exceed the onboard logging memory. All right, let me leave it at 50 hertz for right now. Let's next consider the logging conditions to turn it on and off. Right now, there's an input output on. So what this is going to do is any of the inputs or outputs we can actually trigger for the logging to start. This is nice if you actually want to add a logging switch into your link. When the logging switch is toggled on, let's say if we're using a digital input and we toggle a logging switch on, it'll turn the data logging on when we want. We can be pretty specific with it. The same is going to go for an off condition. We can say when a state or a channel, let's say the digital turns off, it can turn our logging off. So we can do that based on a switch. Alternatively, we can go in here and base it on actual conditions the engine's running in. So let's just say I'm getting on track. I don't want to go in and log anything below, let's say 3,000 RPM. So let's go ahead and just place that at 3,000. Let's say the throttle position has to be at least 0%. You might want to go a little bit higher, something like 10 or 20%, but I'll leave it at 0. The map pressure, I'm going to leave it at 0, but you may say I'm only interested in capturing the data, let's say when I'm in boost. So I might say here 80 kPa and higher, which is starting to get up to higher load and getting into boost. Now there's an off delay. The off delay is going to be waiting this much time to stop the data logging. I find that I like to leave the off delay at least 5 or 10 seconds. So we'll put a value of 5 here. So it continues to log past the point when we exit the conditions here, or when we have the input output conditions turn on and off, it'll continue to log a little bit past that. So it captures a little bit more information. So we have our default set here at 50 hertz, and now we're ready to jump in and assign the onboard logging channels. We can go in here and grab what we want to see. Now, just in fuel alone, we can see how many channels are listed in here. There is a tremendous amount that can be logged. You have to evaluate what you're doing and what you actually have enabled to see if you want to go in and log certain channels. For example, if I'm not doing a flex fuel tune, I don't need to see ethanol, so I wouldn't select this. Acceleration fuel is something I would select for any car, so I definitely want to add that to my list. If I want to add it to the list, I'll grab it here and I'll use the transfer button, and we can see it appears here. Now I can go in here and change this individual frequency. They're all going to default at 50 hertz as I'm bringing the channels in here, but I can go in and, let's say I wanted to look at the acceleration fuel at something like 500 hertz, I can change the individual channels to what I'd like for the frequency. So for example, if I type in here ECT for engine coolant temperature, I can filter it out at the top here, and I bring this over, it'll default at 50 hertz. Engine coolant temperature is a relatively slow moving channel. Coolant temperature doesn't swing wildly within a certain period of time. So we could actually sample this as low as 5 hertz or 5 samples per second. That's more than sufficient to capture the data for engine coolant temperature. So you have to consider what you're logging and the logging speed. Some things should be logged fast, some things will be logged slow. Battery voltage, for example, another thing that could be logged at probably 5 hertz. Intake air temperature generally doesn't move super fast. Something like 5 or 10 hertz would be appropriate. The lower the sampling rate on the channel, the longer you're going to be able to log for, and the smaller the file size. All things to consider. Now, it is a pretty tedious task to go through here and figure out what channels you need to go in and work with. What I have in the training course folder is actual 2 different onboard logging setups here that we can load into your software to get you going. And you can always go in and tweak and adjust those settings to be able to get the frequency right, or maybe you want to take some channels out and add some channels in. It'll populate things a little bit quicker for you. If I go here to load, let's take a look at this. I'm going to jump into the desktop and I'm going to go in here to the G5 course packet, and then we're looking for the onboard logging templates. And I have 2 different examples here. Onboard logging, that's just a general onboard logging for pretty much anything. There's a drag S2000 onboard logging option. This is a little bit more specific for some drag channels and some things I was doing with a drag S2000. Let's just open up the onboard logging. I'll see if I can add in maybe a couple more logging templates that I have saved on some other laptops into this training course folder, just so you can go take a look at this and bring them into your software. Again, it's going to save you some time. Let's go and click open here, and now we can see all of the channels here are being loaded. So for example, the first 2 channels are automatically loaded. I'm gonna go ahead and remove these channels. I don't necessarily have to have Excel, Fuel, or ECT. Maybe I want those, but we can see here that I've loaded all of the channels in here from my logging channels list. Now again, I can come in, if I'm looking at the NOC control, for example, I can go in here and change these to a higher frequency. We know we can do that, but now we have all of these channels loaded in here from my sample file. If you generate a channel list that works really well, like say you like that, you can go to save, and that'll allow you to save it to a specific folder location. Right now it's pointing into my project folder, data log folder. I can go ahead and change that location if I'd like, save it somewhere else. But important to understand that you can load predefined templates and then save them. Saves you a lot of time. And again, I'm gonna try to update the course packet to add a couple additional ones in there. I do have some other ones that should work fairly well. So I'm gonna click OK right now. And when I do that, it's going to store the settings. Well, it's gonna update the link. Let me go ahead and do a Control S and store the settings to the link. So now it's stored the onboard logging conditions that we've set there and all the parameters onto the memory. Now, notice, I'm doing this on Engine Simulator, so I can just slowly break things down here in the tutorial. Notice the engine speed's 2200. I am not data logging right now. So at this point, I want to go ahead and start to data log. Now we know our conditions. I have to be at 3000 RPM for it to turn on. So the onboard logger won't do anything until 3000 RPM. Again, I'm on the simulator. Let me jump over here and turn up the engine speed. So we can see we're at 4000 RPM now. I can go up here a little bit higher RPM, come down. We can kind of see what the RPM's doing here. And I'm just kind of going back and forth. Now, I'm gonna drop below that threshold of 3000 RPM. I'm at 1700 RPM right now. I am able to now go in and retrieve the data log file out of the link because I've went in, I triggered a log to start, I've dropped below the condition of 3000 RPM, the log file is able to be retrieved at this point. Let me go in and do that. So let's jump in here, logging, and we're gonna go here to the ECU log file download. Now if I open this up, we see that that log file is present. It shows us the size of it, the duration, and then all of the channels that are being logged and the different logging rates that we're logging at. Everything's at 50 Hertz right there. So at this point, I want to download the log. So I'm going to select this log file, and I'm going to click download, allow that to download. It's going to automatically try to save this to my log file destination. We talked about that in the last training module. That's going to be something that we set in our preferences option. So right now, let me just save it to the designated location here, and we can see open data log for viewing now. Let's say yes. Let's take a look at that log file. So that's open here in my time plot as I'm connected. So I am online with my link, but now I'm taking a look at that log file that we've just downloaded. Now, let me do one thing here real quick. Let's close this out. If we go to options, we go to preferences, we go to directories, we're going to find here that the log file uses this directory. That's where it's saving it to. I can change this location to anywhere on my laptop when it's going to go ahead and save a data log. Right now it's pointing to my project folder, so that can be something that you want to set up on your computer. It's going into the documents link. I've set this particular link folder into the document section of my laptop, and then the project, the data logs folder. I wanted to mention that because that's where it auto saves to, so we can change this location. Okay, so now the log file is open here. We see that available right here. Now, one thing we're noticing, I'm going to point out here, we know that the conditions were 3000 RPM to turn it on and dropping below 3000 RPM to turn it off. I did not add in that logging template list that I had there, engine speed's not present. So notice it's grayed out here. We see that lambda, target lambda, closed loop, they're available, differential fuel pressure, that's available, but engine speed is not. So it's grayed out and we're missing that. Anytime we don't add it to the logging list, we can't actually data log it and use it for any referencing purposes or logging analysis. So in that case, I'd probably want to jump back in here. Let's jump into the setup logging and add that in here. So give that a second, and we're back into the ECU logging. And if I type in here, engine, we should pick up engine speed, and we're going to add that to our list. So right there, and we're going to save it. Well, we can save it right now. Let's save that to the desktop. Let's save that to the packet, the templates, and we're just going to go ahead and save this as onboard logging template. Save that and click OK, and now it'll go ahead and have RPM in the next onboard log when I take a look at it. So that's going to be what happens if we don't add the channel. We're going to find that nothing's there. With the laptop logging, it logs everything at a slower speed, so we're guaranteed to get the channel, but we may miss some data or information. Now, let's jump back in here real quick. We have that log file, we downloaded it. What you're going to find is that you will start to generate a lot of log files if you're on track. We want to make sure in that situation that we're deleting the log files as we go along. So I would recommend anytime you're on board, you're on track, you come back into the pits, immediately pull the log file out and then automatically save it, download it, and then we save it. Now, in that case, we have saved it already. You want to make sure you're saving the file, and then we're going to delete it. So we delete log or delete all, we delete all the files in here. Right now we have a single log. So if I just do delete log, it's going to delete this. We'll say yes, it's going to get rid of that. So the log file's off the ECU memory. We want to clear the memory out so that we don't get into a situation where we fill the memory up and we're not capturing the data to the ECU's memory, and essentially we're going out and track blind. Definitely don't want to be in that situation. It's happened before to me. Everything's hectic in the pits. You're not thinking about pulling the log out. That is something that I would recommend to do, so you don't forget that. So that's going to be how we deal with the onboard logging. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. The channels are very important. Again, we want to have those details set up correctly in here to maximize the logging. We don't want to log channels that we don't need. We don't want to be missing channels. So we want to make sure that we have things, again, associated here. And again, I'm going to go and spend a little time and probably set up a couple different logging templates so you have a better options to select from, because it looks like some of this logging in here, I'm not quite sure what this file was associated with. This could have been a default file that I edited from Link to do some testing with and ended up in my folder that I added to that course packet. But again, I'm going to try to update that and have something a little bit better for you guys to work with. So it'll cut down on some of the setup and being able to see everything that we need, or at least most of the information that we need. All right, let's go ahead and close this. Now, one last thing. While we're in, we open up the onboard log, we see it's in our time plot. We know we can scroll through this. Our parameters list will show us what we are logging. Anything that's not grayed out is a live channel that's being logged. We know that if we scroll through here, panning across, we can use the down or up arrows to zoom in or zoom out and allow us to see the information in different bits of the data log. This is a very short log at 15 seconds. If it's 20 minutes long, you can put your cursor at some position and zoom in using the up or the down arrow to kind of highlight in there and take a look. But we'll find that everything is paired wherever the line's placed, wherever you're scrolling through here, everything is tied together within the link, meaning the parameters list will show you all the data channels being logged at that time, wherever the cursor's at, and the tables here, if we click H and take the gradient away, it'll go in and trace through the table as to wherever your line is, so it'll actually pinpoint that specific location. Now, in this case, we don't see anything popping up on our table because we didn't have engine speed being logged or MGP. So it has no point of reference as to where we are in the table, so it can't actually use the highlighted function so it highlights the cell point so we can actually pinpoint that. So we want to make sure we're logging all the pertinent channels. Let's go back and click H. Last thing here, Log File Manager allows us to take a look at the actual data log file. So this is our ECU log. Notice we have PC logs open here. They're different. That's when we the laptop log. ECU log is our onboard log. We can switch to a different data log to take a look. We can just click on these different data logs, see different information in our Log File Manager, and we can go in here and we can save this as different names if we'd like. Again, we can go up here to the save option. It saves it to the location. We can go and do the logging, save log file as, whatever's open, save it as a different name to a different location. We can clear all the logs out. If we want to close all these data logs, we'll go here and select the data log file that closes just that one out. We can close all the log files out. That'll go ahead and clear them all out all together. Log File Manager allows us to go in and see all the different logs opened up at the same time, clear them out, save them. Again, we have some of that functionality up here as well, but pretty straightforward in terms of using the ECU logging. The biggest thing is getting the samples per second right, the conditions to turn it on and off, and getting the channels correct. So we want to make sure that we're not, again, logging too many channels. We don't want to be missing channels. We want to have the appropriate speeds or frequencies for our channels, so everything is going to be logging correctly, and we're going to get the maximum logging space and being able to take advantage of the ECU logging. Okay, that's going to be it for taking a look here at our onboard logging. any comment or questions on anything we cover in this training module. Post your comment or questions into the video's comment section or into the private forum. That's going to wrap it up here. I'll see you guys in our next training tutorial. Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here. And you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.